Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're tackling a mystery that's been silent for over 2,000 years. It's a story about a lost empire, an impossible puzzle, and the forgotten words of kings that were hiding in plain sight the entire time.
So picture this, the ruins of Persepolis, the incredible capital of the Persian Empire. When Alexander the Great torched the city back in 330 BCE, he did more than just burn buildings. He effectively silenced an entire civilization. The voices of its kings, its workers, its everyday people, they were just gone. Because all over those ruins were these strange little wedge-shaped marks. For centuries, most people just walked right by them, thinking they were decorations or, maybe even worm tracks. Nobody had a clue they were actually words. An entire empire's history locked away in a code that no one on Earth knew how to read.
Okay, so what exactly made this script so incredibly hard to crack? Let's dive in and really look at the scale of the challenge that these codebreakers were up against. Right. The first thing you have to get your head around is that cuneiform isn't a language. It's a writing system. Think of it like our alphabet. We use it to write English, Spanish, German, whatever. Well, this wedge-based script was used for thousands of years to write dozens of totally different languages all across the ancient world. And this is where the codebreakers got their first real lucky break. See, while older versions of cuneiform, like Babylonian, were a total nightmare with hundreds of complex signs, the Persians had developed their own, much simpler version. It was almost like an alphabet, and that elegant simplicity, well, that would turn out to be the key to everything. And the person who first found that key wasn't some famous professor or a grizzled archaeologist. Nope, he was a young German schoolteacher tackling this ancient puzzle from the comfort of his own study. So the story goes that our guy, George Grotefend, was a bit of a whiz with riddles. And one night, he's out drinking with his buddies and basically boasts that he can crack this mysterious Persian script on what was essentially a drunken bet. He decides to solve a puzzle that had stumped the world's greatest minds for centuries. His approach was pure genius, like something out of a Sherlock Holmes story. He couldn't read a word, but he was great at spotting patterns. First, he just assumed inscriptions from a palace must be about kings. Makes sense. Then he noticed a repeating formula, King A, son of King B. But here's the real kicker. He found one inscription where a king's father was not also a king. He grabs a history book and, bam, he finds a perfect match. King Xerxes, son of King Darius, whose own father, Hystaspes, was a nobleman, but never a king. And just like that, in a matter of weeks, he started assigning sounds to the symbols based on the names. He had turned the key. But when he presented his discovery, the academic elite just dismissed him. I mean, how could a simple schoolteacher solve this? His brilliant work was pretty much ignored for decades. So Grotefend had forged the key. But it would take a completely different kind of person, a true man of action, to find the monumental door that this key was meant to unlock. And that brings us to Henry Rawlinson, a British army officer stationed in Persia. If Grotefend was our armchair detective, Rawlinson was the real-life Indiana Jones. Rawlinson heard about this massive inscription carved way, way up on a cliffside at a place called Behistun. The catch? It was 300 feet up a sheer rock face. And, to make it even harder, the ancient sculptors had deliberately chipped away the ledge below it. So, for years, Rawlinson literally risked his life, dangling from ropes, just to copy down the text. And what he found up there was the absolute grand prize. It was the cuneiform equivalent of the Rosetta Stone. The same proclamation from King Darius, but carved in 3 different scripts. By cracking the simple Old Persian first, he suddenly had a direct translation key for the much, much more complex Elamite and Babylonian languages. Now, this is the really crucial part. Rawlinson's dangerous climb didn't just let us read Persian. Cracking Babylonian meant we could finally read the secrets of entire lost civilizations. We're talking the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Code of Hammurabi, all of it. The code wasn't just broken, it was blown wide open. But even with the language finally readable, the biggest discovery of all was still just sitting there, buried, waiting for someone to find it in the 1930s.
Fast forward to 1933. A team from the University of Chicago is digging around Persepolis, and they stumble upon a chamber. Inside, over 30,000 clay tablets and fragments, a whole intact archive.
And here's the most incredible plot twist you could ever imagine. These tablets were just unbaked clay. They should have dissolved into mud thousands of years ago. But the giant fire that Alexander the Great set to destroy the city actually preserved them. It baked them solid, like pottery in a kiln. The very act of destruction is the only reason these records survived. You can imagine the excitement. Scholars were going crazy. What could be on these things? Secret histories of the Persian kings? Maybe lost religious texts? The personal diary of Xerxes himself? The answer was receipts. Yeah, thousands upon thousands of them. Records of payments for things like barley, wine, and sheep. It was basically the ancient world's most boring filing cabinet.
But hang on. It might sound dull, but this was the real treasure. While all those grand monuments told us how kings wanted to be seen, these receipts told us how the empire actually worked from the ground up. They showed this amazingly organized multicultural society where powerful women were managing huge estates and workers were paid based on their skill, not where they came from. This was the real story of the Persian Empire.
This data, hidden in plain sight for 2 millennia, would completely rewrite our understanding of ancient history. But how? How did these ancient spreadsheets do that? We'll open up the ledgers of Persepolis and find out in part 2. For centuries, pretty much everything we thought we knew about the ancient Persian Empire came from one source: its enemies, the Greeks. But what if the real story wasn't etched into giant monuments or written down in histories of war? What if it was hiding in plain sight, in thousands of boring, old administrative clay tablets? Well, we're about to take a look at the empire's receipts, and believe me, they tell a completely different story.
So if you only read the Greek sources, you'd picture the Persians as, tyrants ruling over a disorganized horde of slaves. It's the classic story, right? The winners write the history. But these archives, dug up from the ruins of Persepolis, they throw a huge wrench in that narrative. Which forces us to ask a really big question. What did the Greeks actually get wrong?
The short answer? Pretty much everything. And we're not talking about minor corrections here. These tablets don't just tweak the old story, they completely flip the script. So it's time to bust some serious myths.
Let's start with the biggest one of all. This idea that Persepolis, this absolute wonder of the ancient world, was built on the backs of slaves. The Greeks certainly seem to think so, probably because their own society ran on slave labor. But the tablets, they reveal something else entirely.
I mean, the contrast is just staggering. On the one hand, you have this image of misery and force. But on the other, the tablets introduce us to this whole new category of people called the Kurta. And here's the thing. These weren't slaves. They were the engine room of the empire. So who were these Kurta people? Well, think of it less like a slave pit and more like a massive federal employment program. We're talking about stonemasons, artisans, and laborers brought in from all over the empire. Egypt, India, you name it. Now, was their freedom restricted? Yes. But, and this is the absolute game changer, they were paid for their work. And we know exactly what they were paid because these tablets aren't epic poems, they're payroll records. And they are incredibly specific. A standard meal worker, for example, got about 30 liters of barley every month. This was a highly organized, structured system, not the chaotic, cruel mess the Greeks describe. Okay, so if the idea of a formal payroll system is surprising, what these archives reveal about women in the Persian Empire, it just completely shatters the stereotypes. Forget the Greek image of women being hidden away. The tablets introduce us to the ancient world's female CEOs. The Greek view, and probably what you've seen in movies, is that Persian women were invisible, locked away in harems with zero power. But the clay tablets? Oh, they show women as major players in the empire's economy, managing huge estates and commanding massive workforces. Let me give you an incredible example. A woman named Erda Bama. The tablets show she controlled huge territories, had her own official seal, kind of like a corporate stamp, to authorize deals, and she personally managed a workforce of hundreds of people. This isn't some quiet woman in a harem. This is a titan of industry. And this right here, this is one of the most stunning finds of all, evidence of equal pay for equal work. In many skilled supervisory roles, the ration lists show female managers receiving the exact same pay as their male counterparts. In some sectors, like textiles, women were often the top bosses and actually earned more than the men working under them. And it gets even more amazing. The Persian bureaucracy even accounted for childbirth. The records show that new mothers were given extra rations. Think of it as a kind of maternity bonus. I mean, let that sink in. This is state-sponsored support for new mothers 2,500 years ago.
It's just mind-blowing.
Okay, so this empire paid its workers and it empowered its women. But how in the world did it manage a territory that stretched from modern-day India to Libya? Not as a disorganized mess, that's for sure. They had a logistical system that was centuries ahead of its time.
Say hello to the halmi. So what's a halmi? Well, it was essentially an ancient passport, a little clay tablet sealed by an important official that let you travel safely and get supplies all along the famous royal road. It was the key to moving information and people quickly and under control.
The system itself was brilliant because it was so simple. An official gives you a Halmi tablet. You travel for about a day to the next way station. You show them your tablet. The station keeper checks the seal to make sure it's legit, and bam, you get fresh supplies and horses. You were tracked, fed, and accounted for every step of the way. All right, let's talk about religion. We know the great Persian kings like Darius and Xerxes worshipped their main god, Ahura Mazda. But does that mean they forced their religion on everybody else? Well, the tablets suggest a much more practical and tolerant way of doing things. And this is just so fascinating. The state treasury at Persepolis wasn't just funding sacrifices to Ahura Mazda. The ration lists, the receipts, show official state funds going to Elamite gods, Babylonian gods, even to local worship of sacred mountains and rivers. They were basically trying to get on the good side of all the gods, not just their own. The tablets also detail tons of state funding for this mysterious ritual called the Homa ceremony. Now, scholars have debated for years what this sacred drink actually was, but what the archives prove is that this wasn't some fringe cult. This was a central, institutionalized part of court life, all paid for by the state. So we have this unbelievably rich and detailed picture of the Persian Empire, but why did we have to wait over 2,000 years to actually see it? Well, the story of how these archives survived is maybe the most incredible part of this whole thing. Okay, here's what happened. In 330 BCE, Alexander the Great conquered Persepolis and, in a famous act of revenge, burned the entire city to the ground. He wanted to wipe the memory of the Persian Empire off the face of the earth. These tablets were buried in the rubble, totally forgotten, until archaeologists finally dug them up in 1933. That's a gap of more than 2,300 years. And here is the profound, beautiful irony. If the Persians had written the records on papyrus or parchment, all of it would have just turned to ash, but they wrote on wet clay. So Alexander's massive fire didn't destroy the tablets, it baked them. It fired them into hard ceramic, preserving them like stone for eternity. The very act meant to erase their history is the only reason we have it today. Ultimately, what makes these tablets so incredible isn't just that they correct the history of kings and empires. It's that they give us the names and the daily lives of regular people. The stonemasons, the new mothers, the government couriers. For the first time, we can hear their voices, and it pulls the Persian people out of myth and puts them right into human history. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If a story this rich, a history this revolutionary was hiding in a pile of ancient receipts, what other truths are out there? What other lost histories are just waiting for us to find them? Not in some grand library, but in the forgotten, everyday paperwork of the past.